What kind of person steps out onto a wire knowing exactly what it can take from them? No net, no second chance, no room for error. Just a single line stretched across open air. For nearly a century, one family has done exactly that. Again and again and again. The Flying Wallendas, a name built on balance, on precision, on walking the line between life and something else entirely. You've probably heard the stories, the falls, the accidents, the tragedies that seem to follow them through time. Some people call it a curse, but after digging into their history, after looking at what they've survived, what they've chosen, I don't think that's the right word, because this story isn't just about what they've lost, it's about what they keep choosing. Generation after generation, they climb, they step out, they trust the wire, even when it's failed them before. So the question isn't, why did they fall? The question is, why do they keep going? Because this isn't just a story about danger. It's a story about legacy, about identity, about a family that refused to step down, even when everything told them they should. I was going to name this episode Curse of the Flying Wallendas because there is tragedy. But after doing my research, I'm naming it The Legacy of the Flying Wallendas. My name is Marissa, your morbidly curious host, and this is Death Kiss Traveler, the only podcast that dives deep into the horror, history, and hauntings at the places you love. Amusement parks, county fairs, and of course, the circus. I have always been fascinated by the circus, the trapeze artists, the history, the early performers who lived their life in motion, always chasing the next show. There's something about that world that feels almost familiar to me. Like maybe in another life or somewhere deep in my ancestry, I was a part of it. A performer traveling town from town, living for the thrill, the risk, the applause. And if you need more Death Kiss Traveler, follow me on TikTok or Instagram at Death Kiss Traveler Podcast for photos and more. This week, I threw out a 10-minute mini episode. Hopefully you like that little thrill. I'm going to do more. I loved it. But now it's time to walk into the big top and step onto the wire. Let's get into our story. I feel like we need a little history lesson for this episode. I know, don't skip ahead. Stay with me because this history lesson isn't a 12th grade boring classroom lesson with Mr. Perks that will put you to sleep. I promise you this one matters, and I'm going to make it fun because before the falls, before the headlines, before people started whispering about the curse, there was something else entirely. There was wonder. Trapeze artists didn't start out as daredevils chasing death. They started as innovators, performers, people who were trying to do something that had never been done before. The modern flying trapeze actually dates back into the 1850s, but before that, there's been performers since the beginning of time. In the 1850s, there was a French acrobat named Jules Léotard, and he decided that simply swinging wasn't enough. He wanted to fly. So he built a setup over a swimming pool in Paris, just in case he fell, and began experimenting with launching himself from one bar to another mid-air. No safety systems, no real blueprints, just timing, grip strength, and trust. And eventually he took the stage. And here's the part that I love. He didn't just invent an act. He invented a feeling, that moment where the crowd holds its breath. When someone lets go for a split second, they're not falling, they're flying. And if you are a dancer, you might find this part kind of fun. The word leotard actually comes directly from Jules Léotard himself. Back to the 1850s, Léotard needed something practical to wear while performing on the flying trapeze. Loose clothing equaled danger. If it could catch or it could throw him off balance, he needed something tight, flexible, and streamlined. So he wore a one-piece form-fitting garment that let the audience clearly see his movements in the air. Not just the act, the look became iconic. Women especially started calling it the leotard. And eventually that name stuck, and now it's in dance classes, ice skating, gymnastics. So the next time you hear the word leotard, just remember it didn't start in a dance studio. It started high above the ground with a man who was willing to fall. He was so successful and the crowd loved him. But here's the shift. Because as audiences got used to it, as the wow factor faded, performers, they had to push further, higher, riskier, more dangerous tricks. And that's where everything starts to change. Because trapeze and high wire acts stopped being just about beauty and started becoming about survival. And that evolution leads us right to a family who didn't just perform in the air. They built their entire identity on it. A family who took the idea of risk and removed the safety nets completely. The Flying Wallendas. And once you understand where all this started, what they chose to do next feels a whole lot darker. And I had to ask how many people died from trapeze in the early days. There were multiple fatalities that likely occurred between 1800s and 1900s. But there were many more serious injuries and near deaths, paralyzations. We don't know exactly how many fell in those early years because not every fall was remembered or even recorded. But what we do know is that the higher they went, the more often they didn't come back down the way they should have. See, that history lesson wasn't boring, and now you know where the leotard came from. Our story begins in Europe, not with fear, but with tradition. The Walenda family had been performing for generations, long before America ever knew their name. And at the center of it all was Karl Wallenda. He was born in 1905. He wasn't just trained for the wire, he was raised on it. This wasn't entertainment, this was identity. This was survival. And Karl made one decision that would define his legacy. No nets. Because to him, a net didn't just catch you, it made you sloppy, careless, weak. And if you lost focus on the wire, you didn't belong there. When the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus brought them to the U.S., audiences were stunned because this wasn't just a performance, this was the defiance of death. There are acts that thrill you, and there are acts that dare you to look away. And this one made people stop breathing because high above the crowd, suspended in nothing but air and trust, there was something almost impossible. 7 people on a wire. Not side by side, not holding hands, stacked, balanced, layered human bodies built into a living tower. They called it the pyramid. No net beneath them, no safety harnesses, no room for air, just gravity waiting. Every single time they climbed that wire, they weren't just performing, they were gambling with their lives. This was the signature act of the Flying Wallendas, a family known for doing what no one else would even attempt. And by the 1940s, they had perfected danger, or so it seemed. And they performed this trick for years until one day something changed. At first, it was subtle, the kind of thing only performers would feel. A shift in weight, a fraction of imbalance, a breath held a second too long. From the ground, the audience probably didn't even notice. They were used to tension, used to fear. That was part of the show. But up on that wire, they knew something wasn't right. The structure wavered, a sway, a hesitation, a moment where instinct screams, "This is wrong." And then it happened. The pyramid, it fell, bodies fell, one after another, collapsing from the sky in a horrifying chain reaction. Remember, no net to catch them. No second chance to recover, just impact. That famous 7-person pyramid collapsed on January 30th, 1962. During the act, the front man lost balance, which made the entire structure collapse. 2 performers died. Karl Wallenda was seriously injured, and another person who was named Mario was paralyzed for life. The man at the center of it all, Karl Wallenda, the leader, the one who had built his life, his identity on that wire, and now he had watched it all come crashing down, literally. For most people, that would be the end. The moment you walk away, the moment you say, nothing is worth this. Most families would never climb again. Would you risk your children? But the Wallendas, they weren't most families. And Karl Wallenda didn't see the fall as a warning. He saw it as something else entirely. A challenge, a test, something to overcome. Because to him, life didn't exist on the ground. It only existed on the wire. And soon he got back on that wire. As soon as he physically could, because to him, the fall wasn't a warning. It was just a part of the act. So in 1963, just 1 year later, they were still performing. Of course they were. Still climbing, stepping out over nothing. As if the past hadn't happened. As if the air hadn't already taken its toll. And then it happened again. This time, it wasn't a pyramid. It wasn't 7 people balancing in layers of impossible weight. It was something very simple. A high wire act, cleaner, quieter, but no less deadly. Richard Fawnin stepped onto the wire high above the ground. The crowd's watching, holding that familiar mix of awe and fear. Because even when everything goes right, it looks wrong. It looks impossible. And for a moment, everything was right. Balance, control, precision, the kind that only comes from a lifetime of training. Until it wasn't. No dramatic warning, no obvious mistake, just a shift. A loss of footing. Or maybe focus. Something that no one could fully explain. And suddenly he was falling. From that height, there is no recovery. No grabbing the wire, no second attempt. Just air. And then impact. He wasn't a seasoned performer nearing the end of his career. Richard was barely in his 30s, right at the middle of his life. And like so many in the Walenda legacy, his story ended in the air. Another name, another life, added to the growing weight behind the Walenda legacy. By the early 1970s, Karl Wallenda was already a legend. Not just in the circus world, but everywhere. Because by then, he had already survived what should have ended everything. The 1962 collapse, the deaths, the injuries, the kind of tragedy most people never come back from. But Karl did. And he didn't just come back, he went higher, further, more exposed than ever before. So when he stepped out onto the wire at the Lake County Fair in Illinois, no one was thinking about failure. They were thinking about him, the man that couldn't fall, the man who had already beaten all the odds. And maybe that's what makes it so unsettling. It wasn't dramatic at first. Not like the pyramid, no chain reaction, no collapsing bodies. Just one man on a wire, high above the ground, balancing, moving forward with that same calm precision he carried for decades. Step after step, until something shifted. Maybe it was the wire, maybe it was his footing, maybe it was something no one else could see from below. But in an instant, that balance was gone. And Karl Wallenda, the man who had built his entire life above ground, lost it. He fell. For a split second, the crowd didn't react, because how do you process something you've convinced yourself can't happen? This was Karl Wallenda. He doesn't fall, but he did. And this time, he survived again. Injured, shaken, a body that had already endured decades of risk was now carrying even more damage. For anyone else, this would have been the final warning. The moment you say, I've had enough. But Karl didn't see it that way. He never did. And I respect that, because surviving a fall like that doesn't always stop someone. Sometimes it convinces them they're untouchable, that they've beaten it again. And whatever force exists up there, it won't take them. Not yet, and for Karl Wallenda, that delay was running out. By 1978, Karl Wallenda was 73 years old. Most people at that age, well, they're slowing down. They're telling stories about what they used to do, but not Karl. He was still chasing the wire because he had something to prove. Not to the world, he'd already done that, but to himself. He once said, quote, "To be on the wire is life. The rest is waiting," end quote. And Karl Wallenda wasn't ready to wait. On March 22nd, 1978, in San Juan, Puerto Rico, the plan was a high wire walk between two buildings. No net, no harness. He didn't need it. Just a steel cable stretched across open air, hundreds of feet above the ground. But this wasn't like the circus. There was no controlled environment, no tent, no protection from the elements. Just wind that was unpredictable and unforgiving. And on that day, the wind was strong enough that the people watching below could see the wire swaying. But still, Karl climbed, step by step onto the cable, holding his balance pole, 73 years old, and standing exactly where he believed he belonged. At first, everything looked steady, controlled, familiar, the same precision he had carried his entire life. Step, pause, step. But then the wind picked up. Not a gentle push, a force, strong enough to move the wire beneath him, strong enough to make even the most experienced performer fight for control. And suddenly this wasn't a performance anymore. It was a battle. Karl adjusted. He shifted his weight. He fought to stabilize himself. But the wire kept moving, back and forth, just enough to throw off everything he relied on. And then came the moment, the one no one could stop. He lost his balance. At first, it looked like he might recover. A slight dip, a correction, the kind of thing he had done 1,000 times before. But this time, he didn't come back. The pole he was holding shifted, his footing slipped, and Karl Wallenda, the man who had spent his life above the ground, fell. From that height, there was no saving it. No second chance, no catching yourself, just air and then impact. He was pronounced dead shortly after at 73 years old, doing exactly what he had always done. He knew the risks, everyone did. The wind was visible, the danger was obvious, but Karl didn't turn back. He didn't step down. He didn't choose safety because to him, this wasn't reckless. It wasn't unnecessary. It was life. And maybe that's the part of the story that stays with you. Not just that he fell, but that he climbed anyway. He died doing what he loved. Because for Karl Wallenda, the ground was never where he belonged. And in the end, it wasn't where he stayed. When Karl Wallenda fell in 1978, it felt like the end of something. Not just a life, but an era. The man who had defined the high wire, who had built a name out of risk and balance and defiance, was gone. And for a moment, people wondered if the wire would finally go quiet. Because how do you continue after that? How do you step onto the same cable knowing exactly how the story ended? But the truth is, the Wallendas have never been just one man. They were a family, a dynasty, and dynasties don't end that easily. After Karl's death, the next generation didn't walk away. They stepped forward. His children and grandchildren, raised in the same world of heightened risk, had grown up watching him, learning from him, believing what he believed. That the wire wasn't something to fear, it was something to master. And leading that next chapter was his son, Karl Wallenda Jr. He took on the responsibility of continuing the act, rebuilding, reforming the troupe, keeping the Walenda name alive in the world that was starting to demand more safety, more control, more protection. But here's the thing, the Wallendas didn't fully change. Not really. They still performed without nets, still leaned into danger, still built acts that made people hold their breath. But to them, that risk wasn't something to eliminate, it was the point. But then came another generation, and that one would take the Walenda name even further than before. Not just in circuses, but on a global stage. Enter Nick Wallenda, Karl's great-grandson, raised in the same tradition, the same mindset, the same belief that life happens above the ground. But Nick did something different. He didn't just continue the legacy, he amplified it. He took high wire walking out of the circus tent and moved it into the world. Across Niagara Falls, over the Grand Canyon, between skyscrapers. Live on television, millions watching. And just like Karl, no net. But here's where Nick and Karl are a little different. Because while Nick honors the tradition, he also walks a line between old and new. Nick prays before every walk, out loud on camera. He acknowledges the danger, the fear, the possibility that something could go wrong. Something Karl rarely admitted. And yet, despite modern equipment, despite more planning, despite everything we've learned about safety, the risk is still there. Real and unforgiving. It is waiting. Because no matter how much changes, the wire hasn't. It still demands the same thing as it always has: balance, focus, perfection, or everything falls apart. And that's what makes the Walenda legacy so haunting and amazing. Not just the deaths, not the accidents, but the choice. Generation after generation, they're choosing to climb, choosing to step out, knowing exactly what it can take from them, and doing it anyway. Because in this family, the story never really ends. It just keeps moving forward, one step at a time, high above the ground. There's this idea that what happened to the Wallendas belongs in the past, that the deaths, the falls, the tragedies high above the ground were a part of a different time, a more dangerous time, before better equipment, before technology, before we knew how to make things safer. But that's not the truth, because the wire has never changed. The modern era of the flying Wallendas looks different on the surface. It feels controlled. There's televised events, carefully planned stunts, engineers calculating tension down to the inch. Everything appears managed and safe. But look closer and you start to see it. That same danger is still waiting. In 1997, high above the Great Wall of China, Nick Wallenda walked the wire with his mother, Delilah Walenda. A moment meant to show legacy, a family continuing what they had always defined them, until suddenly she lost her balance. There's no dramatic warning when it happens, no signal to the crowd, just a slip, and a body falling where it shouldn't. She survived, thank goodness, but with serious injuries, broken bones. But it was a brutal reminder that even now, even after everything, the next generation wasn't immune. And then, Sarasota, Florida, they brought it back, the pyramid, stacked in the air, balancing on each other, just like in 1962. A structure that history had already proven could fail. And it did. Mid-performance, the performance collapsed. Bodies falling, limbs tangled, impact after impact as performers hit the ground. There were broken bones, facial fractures, concussions, no deaths, but it came close, too close. And if you know the history, if you remember Detroit, you can't help but feel that echo, that pattern, like something repeated itself. And it doesn't stop there, because even in the moments that don't end in a fall, you can feel how close it always is. In Niagara Falls, there was a mist rising off the water that was coating the wire, turning it slick, unpredictable. You can see his movements, the hesitation, the fight to stay steady. But he made it. And then he walked the Grand Canyon, wind pushing against him, relentless. And in the middle of it, Nick Walenda says out loud, "I can't feel the wire." Think about that. The one thing keeping you alive, and suddenly you can't feel it. That's not just danger. That's the edge of life and death. And then his stunts get more wild, if that's even possible. A volcano. Yes, a volcano. In Nicaragua, there was heat rising from below, toxic gas and fumes, air shifting in ways you can't predict. The ground itself is unstable beneath the wire. I can't imagine how hot it was. Heat was coming up. And I'm going to link a YouTube video in this in my show notes because the video is incredible. There was no accident in this, but that death-defying trick is absolutely amazing. And it could have gone so wrong with one step, one shift in balance, one moment of lost control. Because the truth of it, the part that hasn't changed, yes, there are harnesses now. Sometimes. Weather tracking, medical teams waiting below. But none of that removes what matters most. Height, the exposure, the reality that one mistake, 1 second, one misstep is all it takes. And that's why the story doesn't stay in the past. Because the risks didn't end with Karl. It didn't disappear with time. They were just passed down. And step by step, generation after generation. And every time they climb, they're making that same choice, knowing exactly what it can take from them. And stepping out anyway. Because in the end, the wire doesn't care who you are. Legacy doesn't protect you. Experience doesn't guarantee anything. Up there, it's always the same. Balance or fall. Okay, be honest. Now you know the history. You know the risk. Would you step out on the wire? I told you before that I've always been fascinated with the circus. But the high wire and the trapeze artists, they amaze me. And I would try it if I was on a harness. But I have the coordination of a panda bear. We've all seen those videos where they fall from everything. Yep, that's me. But I would love to swing from the platform, attempt a tightrope walk, and just do something that scares me for a brief second. Isn't that what life's all about? Are you really living if you don't do anything new or exciting? I want to know, so write in the comments if you would walk the tightrope knowing the risks. What I admire the most about the flying Wallendas isn't just their skill, it's their relentless commitment to something bigger than fear. Generation after generation, they've faced very real possibility of falling, and they choose to climb anyway. That kind of dedication isn't reckless. It's rooted in identity, discipline, and an unshakable belief in their craft. No matter the losses, the injuries, or the history that follows them, they continue to honor their legacy with every step on the wire. And whether you see it as courage, passion, or something deeper, it's impossible not to respect the strength it takes to keep going. The family is still performing. Not in the past, not in the stories, right now. The flying Wallendas never stopped. They didn't walk away after the falls. They didn't disappear after their losses. They kept going. And today they are led by Nick Walenda, a 7th-generation performer, and the legacy didn't fail, it grew. From circus tents to global stages, from small crowds to millions watching live. High above Niagara Falls, across the Grand Canyon, between skyscrapers. Still no room for error. And now it's not just one man, it's a family, his sister, his wife, his mother, the next generation already learning the wire. Because this isn't just what they do, it's who they are. And no matter how much time passes, no matter how much the world changes, they're still up there, still balancing, still stepping out into the air, knowing exactly what it can cost. So what do you call a story like this? Is it courage? Is it obsession? Is it legacy? Or is it something harder to explain? Because the story of the flying Wallendas isn't just about what happened, it's about what keeps happening. The falls, the survival, the choice to climb again. The story is inspiring. Generation after generation, they've stood at that same edge, felt that same fear, heard that same silence before that first step. And every single time, they choose the wire. Not because it's safe, not because it's easy, but it's because who they are. And somewhere right now, a Walenda is climbing, balancing, stepping out into the air. People can call it a curse. Not because there's proof of anything supernatural, but because when the same kind of tragedy follows the same family, generation after generation, it stops feeling random, and it starts feeling like something else. It's not a curse. It's choice. It's an environment and risk. But that doesn't make it feel less eerie, and I guess that's why I love it. Thank you for listening to Death Kiss Traveler. This podcast is written and researched by me, Marissa. Produced by Sunkiss Traveler. Ready to turn your dream vacation into reality? At Sunkiss Traveler, they take the stress out of planning so you can focus on what really matters. Making memories. Whether you're craving a tropical escape, a magical theme park adventure, or the perfect cruise, they handle all the details from start to finish. Personalized travel planning, exclusive deals and insider tips, and of course, theme park experts. You don't have to spend hours searching or second guessing. Your next adventure starts now. See show notes for details or visit sun-kissedtraveler.com. And I will see you next week, my spooky friends.